Okay, so dear colleagues, I was trying to think of your locations in Kharkiv, Warsaw, Geneva, and perhaps other places. Welcome to this Module 3 training in relation to Horizon Europe project management. So this third and final one, it's focusing sort of on the execution, control, and closing phases of the projects. So the agenda today, it's very much about the sort of execution and control phase. And as with my previous trainings, I'm trying to just be very practical and offer practical advice from my own sort of experience. So, and it's not exhaustive training, and I'm sure there's still gaps, but nevertheless. Okay, so with the agenda in the execution control phase, the kickoff meeting, these projects is very, very important. So I kind of give a checklist of things you might want to consider for that. And then we'll talk about regular online project meetings. Again, my personal recommendations there. I'm going to say some words about deliverables, milestones, publications, knowledge management, dissemination, communication, exploitation. I'm then going to talk at considerable length about periodic reviews. These are reviews done typically in a 3-year project around the middle of the project and at the end of the project with the European Commission and with external reviewers. So I'm going to cover various things like the occurrence, purpose, and reporting for those. The Part B, which is the main report for these, financial reporting, and the project review meetings that usually take place in connection with those. They're going to talk some word about budget flexibility, because I often get asked by project partners, can they move budget from here to there? Then the end of this sort of section, it says grant amendments. So often there are some formal changes that need to be made to your project. So I'll talk a bit about the reasons for making an amendment, and then I'll cover the 2 most common types of amendment that you might have, which would be things like the withdrawal of a consortium partner, or the extension of the project duration. And then lastly, second section, very briefly, closing phases. What are the sort of main activities, the things that occur? And then it's not shown here on the agenda, but there's also an optional homework for those who want to do. Okay, so let's move on about execution and control phase. So kickoff meeting. All these projects, you have a kickoff meeting typically in the first month, the first few weeks of the project. A very important event. It sort of sets the tone, hopefully, for your whole project for the next 2, 3, or 4 years. So what might be things that you would want to think about prior to that meeting to make sure it's a comprehensive meeting? So, well, look, firstly, project overview and objectives. During this kickoff meeting, you may want to make sure that you review the project's goals, expected impacts, and key deliverables. You want to make sure that your partners are aligned on the scope, timelines, and intended outcomes. So you'll be making sure partners are presenting about those. Consortium roles and responsibilities. It's really important to clarify each partner's contributions. And I've written in bold here, you really want partners to take ownership for their responsibilities, to know that they are accountable. You want to clarify the communication channels, from the coordinator down to work package leaders, down to individual researchers. You want to clarify decision-making processes that are described in your consortium agreement. I mean, of course, during a project, there'll be all kinds of decisions of varying degrees of importance, and you want to make sure that it's clear for people who they need to make these decisions with, or if it's something more formal, what's the procedure for that. Work packages and milestones. Each work package leader during this kickoff meeting, they should present their work package and associated tasks. And again, I'm repeating myself here in bold. It's really important that each work package leader takes ownership for their work package. This is why it's really important during this kickoff meeting that these work packages, each one is presented by the work package leader, and indeed, and quite possibly individual tasks, which may have a different leader, that you get that person, him or her, to present, so they're taking ownership. And yeah, during this kickoff meeting, really get the partners to discuss in concrete terms what are the work activities for the first 6 to 12 months relating to deliverables, milestones, and so forth. Point number 4, financial administrative rules, review funding allocation, eligible costs. And I'll talk about it a bit later on, but partners will often ask, oh, how much money do I have for travel? How much do I do this? Can I do that? So it's good to present about that. And yeah, ensure understanding of the grant agreement and consortium agreement. Now I've got this great big yellow star here in the top right hand corner, and I've written here, well before the project officially starts. In other words, already during the contract negotiations with the commission, remind the academic partners to recruit their PhD students stroke postdocs on time. So for an individual university in your consortium, they'll have all kinds of paperwork and procedures before a PhD student can be hired or a postdoc. If you're not careful, you as the coordinator of this Horizon Europe project, I've seen it on many occasions where the project has officially started, let's say in January, and months later, sometimes even in worst case, like it's only half a year later, where finally a university or academic partner has actually got their PhD students, their postdocs in place. Now, for obvious reasons, you want as much to avoid that. So if you're the coordinator or if you're a partner in these, get thinking about this issue right from the moment you get the invitation to contract negotiations from the commission. Yeah. Other things as part of this sort of checklist for your kickoff meeting, risk management contingency planning. So review, list the critical risks and propose mitigation measures in the grant agreement, especially ones relating to sort of scientific matters. Establish a monitoring process to resolve issues. Ethics, data management, open science. So discuss ethical compliance and data protection measures. Review open access requirements and dissemination plans. Communication dissemination strategy. So review the project's communication dissemination exploitation plan, which is in your grant agreement. And identify concrete activities for the first 6 months in this area. So find out from partners if they're holding relevant events. Try to get a pipeline of news that can be used for posts in social media and on the project website. And of course, at the end of your kickoff meeting, next steps and action points to summarize key decisions, responsibilities, set dates for the next meetings and reporting deadlines. Okay, now moving away from the kickoff meeting, and I'm talking about regular project meetings. Now, what I'm going to say here, this is my personal recommendation if I was project coordinator myself. And what I'm recommending here, it's my personal recommendation, but I know in practice, it can be a very, very different story, and projects still succeed, they still do well. But anyway, my personal recommendation is that it's good to have a weekly online meeting, which is on the same day, same time, to review the project's action item list. I say this because if you do a regular weekly meeting, it becomes a habit. partners don't even need to think what daytime it will be at, because it becomes ingrained. Now, these meetings, they'll typically be about maybe half an hour to 1 hour in duration. Maybe at the start of the project, they might be a bit longer. Or if you've got key events coming up, they might be a bit longer. But oftentimes you find that, in fact, the meetings, if you're doing them really regularly, they become relatively short because people are on top. The partners are on top of their tasks and their deliverables. But the reason why I'm banging on about the importance of this is I find that the regularity helps to keep partners focused on their tasks and actions in the project. That's what you're really, really driving for, this focus, yeah. And the regularity helps ensure partners are made to feel accountable. So I find that it's quite amazing how partners often suddenly wake up and address their actions, say the day before or the morning before the meeting that takes place in the afternoon. Yeah. And of course, nowadays, if you're doing these sort of regular Zoom or Teams or whatever, most of these video conferencing facilities have some sort of AI built into them. In the case of Zoom, if you have a business subscription, you can use their AI companion, and these will automatically write minutes and actions. I mean, and this is such a valuable, helpful feature. And then, of course, yeah, if you do it weekly, you can book these weekly Zoom or team meetings or whatever, or Google Meet, into the email calendar of the consortium partners. On the right of this slide, this is sort of an example, if you like, of an action item list from a project which was called Fit for NMP. So this was like a 3-year coordination support action that I was coordinating. It finished at the end of 2023. I'm not showing all the pages from the action item list. What you see here is just the ones for work package 2. There was a work package 2, which was about setting up innovation workshops. And what I did was I copied from the grant agreements the part of the work package where it showed the number of person months for each partner and who's the work package leader. Now, I did that because I wanted to make sure it was clear we all know who's the work package leader, but I also wanted to sort of emphasize, look, these are the other partners who've got person months. In other words, they should be doing things for this work package. So I have that bit of the table there. Then below that, in the middle, you see there's a table where it says performance indicators. So these were the key performance indicators for this work package. I had a little thing where you see these two columns where it says final target and current total. So the final target was obviously what we needed to get to by the end of the project. The current showed where we currently stood. I had a thing where I just highlighted in yellow any indicator that had not yet been achieved. Just so, because obviously there's a lot of information on the sheet, somehow I wanted to make it quicker to access, just to focus attention. And then below it, I would have a table where it was really describing or trying to capture concisely, look, what needs to be done, or what are people doing in relation to this work package. So you see some reference in this case, it's talking about an innovation workshop that was going to be held at VTT in Espoo, Finland, back in November, I think 2022 or 2023. But obviously, this is the sort of thing you can do and adapt for your own particular projects. Moving on, in these projects, Horizon Europe, we have deliverables. Much of the time, they're reports, or even when they're not reports, there still needs to be a report, so to speak, where at least things are documented, photographs of prototypes or whatever. Now, my comment here is make sure you create a standardized deliverable template for the partners to use. This will save a lot of time and effort over the course of the project, and make sure this template is somewhere that can be readily accessed by all the partners. Nevertheless, if you're the coordinator, make sure that you're keeping track of the deliverables when they're due and always thinking ahead. So if there's a deliverable due, say June 2025, by the end of June 2025, I would already be, as coordinator, I would email the partner responsible for that deliverable 2 or 3 months beforehand with a copy of this deliverable template and just sort of saying, oh, look, here's a gentle reminder. You've got deliverable so-and-so coming up. Yeah, hope you're sort of on top of things, yeah. And it was just a way to gently nudge them, try to keep them on track, yeah. But also, when you think about deliverables, you want to make sure that these deliverables are of good quality. So one way you can do that is to make sure that deliverables are being reviewed by other partners in the consortium. What you see here, this is a table. It was a Horizon 2020 project that I had called CIFIS Home. We had a lot of very good Italian partners working on this project. And what they did was they devised this table. In the first 2 columns, you see the deliverable number and the name of the deliverable. If you jump then to, say, the last 3 columns, you see where the third to last column, which sort of show when a deliverable was supposed to be produced. This is an internal deadline. Second to last column would then show who are the reviewers of this deliverable. Now, these would be partners who weren't involved in the actual production of the deliverable. So this should be, quote unquote, independent parties reviewing this. And they themselves then had a deadline by which they were supposed to do a review. This is a sort of general approach to sort of trying to ensure better quality, good quality deliverables. And this is something that you might also want to consider. In context of deliverables, once they've been prepared, they have to be submitted to what is called SIGMA. This is short for System for Grant Management, which is via the European Commission's Funding and Tenders portal. And what you see below here, this is a screenshot from a project that I'm currently involved in, QRC for ESP. It's a research and innovation action, and you see here the deliverables that we've done so far. In some of the columns you see when they were due for delivery, when we've actually submitted them. We just recently had our midterm review already after 1 year, and we're anticipating getting approval for those deliverables quite shortly. Last thing to say about deliverables. So the Commission is very, very keen that as many deliverables as possible are public. By public meaning that they can be publicly accessed through the European Commission's Cordis website. They're keen for deliverables to be public because these Horizon Europe projects, it's public money, it's public funding, and the feeling is that as the general public should get as much benefit as a consequence. Now, one of the ways, in fact, on a practical level for you, especially those of you new to these projects, the fact that so many deliverables are public provides a sort of learning opportunity. So, and this can be especially helpful to understand how to produce deliverables required in all Horizon Europe projects. So I'm looking now in the sort of bullet point in the left-hand corner of my slide. Things like project website, promotion materials, social media, there's always a deliverable for that. Likewise, there's always a deliverable in relation to data management plan and there's always deliverables relating to dissemination, communication, and execution plan. And most, if not all of these, are public deliverables. So it's a chance, if you're not familiar, go and have a look how other projects have done this. And I give an example here. So the QR code you see in the top of the middle of the screen, that will take you direct to the European Commission's Cordis project database. And specifically, I pulled up an example of a twinning project, rather like TWISMA. This one, trying to see what I can't remember what the acronym is, but anyway, it's a twinning project where they're working about an industrial ecosystem around the core principles of Industry 4.0 and the digital twin. Anyway, that's kind of by what the specific topic is. What I want to show is, look, I've got to a section called results where they've got deliverables, and you see this list. They've got like they've got a data management plan, they've got a dissemination, exploitation, communication plan, they've also got a gender equality report, so on and so forth. These can all be downloaded, yeah? And there's hundreds of these twinning projects where you can access their deliverables, at least their public deliverables, through the Cordis database. So don't hesitate to sort of go and have a look and download. Some words about milestones in these projects. So all Horizon Europe projects have milestones. The recording of the completion of those is done in Sigma, this online system. Here you see the screenshot. This is from my QRC for ESP project. You kind of see at least 10 of the milestones that we've got and our current status. So certainly in my case with the projects that I get involved in, typically the way these milestones are typically sort of linked to an important deliverable. And so the way you're indicating the deliverable has been completed is by the fact that such and such a deliverable has been submitted. Some words now about publications, because it often get asked. Look, it's essential to acknowledge Horizon Europe funding, in brackets also to show the EU flag, in journal articles and conference papers based on research results from a Horizon Europe project. It's a good idea to check in the grant agreement, there's an article 17.2, and also with the European Commission project officer that you have to know what formal statement to use in order to make this acknowledgement. And I put in brackets, this is because the wording may change over time. Nevertheless, with that said, currently the following formal statement can be something like this. So imagine you've written a journal article and the results presented in that article are somehow related to the TWISMA project. You could use one of these two statements or very, very similar statements. Of course, you might have to, depending on how you do your acknowledgements at the end of the paper, you might slightly reformulate, but something like the following, you know, that the research presented in this paper was funded by the European Union under Horizon Europe for the TWISMA project, grant agreement, blah, blah, blah. Or we would like to acknowledge the support of the European Union under Horizon Europe for the TWISMA project. Likewise, if you've got a poster, maybe you've got a conference, and you've got a nice poster you're presenting, it's good if you put some sort of statement like this and then include, say, the EU flag that you see in the bottom left-hand corner here. If you do that, you've ticked the boxes. Still related to publications. So any publications that you do, journal articles, conference papers, you need to record that information in Sigma, in this online system. I must admit, I forgot to put it as a bullet point here on the slide, but a vital, essential thing is that this journal article, conference paper, it needs to be, if you've done an acknowledgement to, for example, TWISMA or any Horizon Europe project, it's vital that a copy of that paper is available in a publicly accessible, open access repository. That's absolutely essential. And the details, the web link for that is something that you'll have to enter into Sigma along with the rest of the publication details. I'll move on now. Some words about knowledge management. So, as mentioned already before, there's an obligatory, a required deliverable about knowledge management, how you do it in your project. The way to go about preparing a data management plan is you need to follow the European Commission's template. This QR code, this very large one on the right-hand side here, this will take you directly to where you can download that template. What that template explains to you is that you need to define your data into different types of categories, which will be collected, generated, used, and processed. So these, and then this sub bullet point, this sort of shows you the typical categories that you have of data. Public research data, confidential research data, so on and so forth. In this data management plan, you need to also say where you're going to be storing, of course, much of this data. And what I suggest here is that you set up some sort of cloud storage and file sharing facility to share data, files, deliverables between partners. You might want to consider Microsoft Teams, Microsoft SharePoint, Dropbox, Google Drive, whatever cloud storage facility you're using. Obviously, then somehow organize the folders. The classic way to do it is to have a folder for each work package, maybe a folder where specifically for meetings, where you captured the meeting minutes and photos from those events. Also, in this cloud storage, we mentioned earlier on about having a template for all these deliverables. This cloud storage is the obvious place where you would store that deliverable. What else might you want to make sure is there? Things like project logos, a standardized presentation about the project. That's again also a thing to put in this cloud storage. We move on to talk about communication, dissemination, exploitation. So this is, for the Commission, a very important and obligatory activity. What I'm showing here on this slide is a kind of summary table. This is actually for my, just looking closely, this is for my QRC for ESP project, which is currently running. So in this particular project, when we wrote the proposal, it had a very, very strict page limit. It was just 20 pages. And consequently, we had to, and although it's 20 pages, there was a hell of a lot that you still needed to include. So it meant that for this section on dissemination, communication, exploitation, we really had to do everything very concisely. And so, yes, we had this particular table. And I discussed it, I think, already in module 2 when I was talking about proposal preparation. So anyway, with the table shows the different kind of results that can be either communicated, disseminated, or exploited. It shows the different target audiences, and then the KPIs, the key performance indicators that we're supposed to achieve by the end of the project. Now, obviously, in the last column, period 1, this is sort of us tracking and capturing where we stood at the end of period 1. So in our case, the end of period 1 already came after 1 year. This is the sort of thing that you should, whichever project, you should have a table, make sure you keep it so up to date where you stand. With that said, although you have this sort of summary table, it's also important that you keep a more sort of itemized recording of the different events, different activities in the field of communication, dissemination, and exploitation. So what I do is I have a table, this table that you see here. I have it in an Excel file, and I basically circulate it with the consortium partners, I know, every 3 months, 6 months, something like this, and I ask them to update it. And in this Excel file, as you can see in the first column, you've got all these different types of activities, and I basically just make sure that they put in the information. And certainly, if and in this table, there's a section which is about have they participated in a conference or published a paper. Ask them to, I mean, I didn't actually do it with this table, and this is why I'm reminded to say to you now, but tell those partners to also give a web link for the open access repository where their poster or their paper is stored, yeah, because this will help you a lot later on when you're updating Sigma. So this is still this slide here. This is still part of this Excel file. It's just showing the other kind of activities and getting partners to update this every, as I say, every 3 months, 6 months, something like this. Okay, we move on to talk about periodic reviews. So first thing that I'd like to say some wording about the occurrence of these, the purpose of these, and then about the associated reporting. So occurrence. Horizon Europe projects, which are 2 to 3 years in duration, they're typically divided into 2 periods, period 1 and period 2. Projects of a longer duration may have additional periods. So, for example, I've seen projects which lasted 5 years, and they had, I believe, 3 periods, certainly 3 periods, maybe even 4. The purpose of these reviews, well, it's fairly obvious. It seems like it's to assess the project progress. The purpose is to evaluate whether the project is meeting its objectives, milestones, and deliverables as planned. It's to ensure compliance. The purpose is to verify adherence to Horizon Europe funding rules, ethical guidelines, contractual obligations. It's about monitoring the budget and resources. The purpose is to review financial expenditures and resource allocation to ensure efficient use of funds. Identify risks and challenges. The review, the purpose is to detect potential risks, delays, deviations, and propose corrective actions if needed. And then lastly, facilitate communication. During these reviews, the purpose is to provide an opportunity for the beneficiaries, in other words, the partners, and the European Commission to discuss findings, feedback, and future steps. Of course, these periodic reviews, a very, very significant part, important part, is the reporting. So there's, in essence, 3 reports. I'm looking on the left-hand side of my slide at the titles in bold. So there's a technical report part B, there's a technical report part A, there's technical report part B, and there's a financial report. Now going through each of those one by one. So the technical report part A, these are online forms that are to be completed in Sigma. You'll find there the project summary that needs to be written up, an update about critical risks, progress on milestones, publications. We talked already about those 2 points. There's also a section about the dissemination activities, the numbering, and some other online forms that need to be filled out. The technical report part B, this is probably the bit that's going to occupy the most of your time with respect to reporting. This technical report is often referred to by partners as the periodic management report. This technical report provides a comprehensive overview of project progress, project objectives, achievements, deviations, and impacts, including scientific and innovation-related progress. The technical report provides explanations of work performed for each work package, use of resources, risk management, and compliance with EC requirements, supported by deliverables and milestones. The financial report, here, as you may recall from the Module 2 training, there's two types of sort of with these Horizon Europe projects, you've got two sorts. You've got either a lump sum funded project or what's called an actual costs funded project. And depending on which one you have, this means there's differences in the way you do reportings. So for example, in the case of a lump sum funded project, the financial statement confirms the percentage completion of work packages rather than detailing actual incurred costs, thereby, at least in theory, simplifying financial reporting. On the other hand, actual cost funded projects, the financial statement provides a breakdown of actual incurred costs, including personnel, travel, equipment, and subcontracting, ensuring they align with the project's budget and Horizon Europe rules. Now, I'm going to, in my subsequent slides, I'm going to talk at some length about the technical report part B and about this financial reporting. But before I go on to the next slide, let me just bring your attention to the right-hand side of my slide. There's a QR code. That QR code will take you to a PDF of this document. This is the formal document from the Commission about how to do periodic reporting. So it gives explanation, it gives a template and explanation about the Part A, the Part B, and the financial report. As with all Commission documents, and I've said in previous trainings, make sure you download the latest version. And in brackets, hope that there isn't any kind of bugs with passwords that prevent their use. Okay. I need to say more words about this technical report, the Part B, this periodic management report. Now, in this very busy slide and in the next two slides, which I'm afraid are also rather busy, rather a lot of information packed, what I'm actually showing you is pages from a real periodic technical report. So I mentioned earlier on that up until quite recently, just over a year ago, I was coordinating a project called Fit for NMP, Coordination Support Action. These pages you see here, these are from the midterm, the period 1 technical report for that project. So I say it's not exhaustive. I'm just showing a few pages to sort of illustrate a few things. So I'll step now through each of these pages that you see. So on the left, I had a simple table showing each of the different work packages, who's the work package leader, what were the objectives, and then a brief comment, is that objective, has it been completed? This is very early in it's like on page 5 of this report. This is just a high-level view, so that the project officer at the Commission, the reviewers, they get a quick view. Are you saying have you finished that objective, that work package yet? This is something you might want to consider. Then later on in your periodic technical report, you're going to have to go through each of the work packages in some quite extensive detail. And here I'm showing an example for work package 1, which was called mapping. So what I've done for this work package, and indeed for all the other work packages, I would copy the objectives for that work package. I'd copy them straight from the grant agreement, the Annex 1 description of action. I would then have a brief section called main achievements. So it'll be 3, 4, 5 bullet points summarizing the main achievements. Your project officer at the commission, she or he will appreciate this because typically they won't be an expert in your particular field of research. Yeah, and this enables them to get a quick idea of how the project's progressing. But not only would I have, say, the main achievements described in some sort of qualitative terms, I would then also replicate the performance indicator table from the grant agreement. I put that there. I show what the current totals were versus the final target. And then I'd have this section where it says progress per task. And it goes through task by task. And with each of these tasks, I would actually ask the relevant task leader, work package leader, look, please give me 1, 2, 3 paragraphs summarizing what you've done, what the partners have done for this task during the past reporting period. At the end, and now I'm looking at the third page to the right of the slide here, then to sort of cap it off, at the end of each work package, I would have a table, and for each of the partners that has a person-month allocation for that work package, I would say to them, look, please give me a few sentences, very concisely saying concretely, what have you done for this work package? Because, and in brackets, in parentheses, because ultimately you've got to justify what, if you're claiming person months budget for that work package, you need to say why it's merited. What have you done? Yeah. If you take this approach for each of your work packages, you'll be on a good way to having a good technical report. Also, there's still in this technical report, and by the way, this report, it has a very particular structure, particular headings. There'll be a section 5, and I'm looking at the page here on the left. Section 5 is about deviations from the Annex 1 and Annex 2. So you'll be asked about, have there been any deviations in terms of tasks? The typical one is you might be perhaps been late with deliverables. And in this particular case with Fit for NMP project, we were a bit late. But this is, I mean, provided only if, in an ideal world, you get all your deliverables done in time, of course, but in practice, sometimes this is unavoidable that you are late. This is still tolerated, provided you give a concrete justification. I mean, the justification just needs to be perhaps a couple of sentences. And here you see what we wrote. In section 5.2, you asked to give information about resources. I'm now looking to the page on the right-hand side of this slide. So here, what's really good is to have a table where you show what person months have actually been booked by each partner for each work package during the reporting period, and how that figure compares to what was planned, in fact. Now, not only is it good to do, say, a table, but because obviously a table, especially when you've got lots of consortium partners, it can be difficult to read. I suggest you create some sort of simple bar chart figures, which are shown at the lower part of the page, and that's what you see here. And of course, if there is any significant difference between if there is any sort of significant difference between what's actually been booked versus what has been planned, write some short explanation for that. Still in the area of technical reports, in this section 5.2, not only do you need to talk about the person months, but you're also required to talk about the costs that are being booked by partners for the period. Here again, you see this is for the Fit for NMP project. So I sort of showed in a simple Excel file how much has been booked for personnel costs and other direct costs. Not only did I create a table, but I also sort of showed, again, a sort of kind of bar chart figure at the bottom. This is usually sort of appreciated. If there are any significant differences, so for example, with our Fit for an MP, so at the end of period 1, we were running the project during the COVID pandemic. So we had very, very low travel costs because traveling wasn't permitted. So if you just give a short explanation, this is really appreciated. Now, even with that all said, you write hopefully the perfect technical report, and the commission does so much scrutiny, so much checking, and they really are very focused on perceived deviations. Don't be surprised that if you prepare your report, you submit it, it's really not uncommon that the initial version gets rejected and you get asked to provide more information. And so, for example, in our case, with this Fit for an MP, it was initially rejected and we were requested to provide more information. I mean, and on this third page on the right, you see it says, under point number 1, it says Europeans question to Intelligentsia, to my company, could you please explain the high deviation of direct personnel costs declared as actual costs? So I went back and went through and gave a more detailed answer. Provided you give a reasonable justification, that they will still accept supposed deviations. Okay, I think that's enough about technical reports. Let's move on to about the financial reporting, because this is an important part. So we already mentioned that the financial reporting needs to be done at the end of each project period. Usually projects have 2 periods, of period 1 and period 2, but they can have more periods in the case of projects of longer duration, for example, 4 years or more. These financial reports, they're online financial statements, they have to be submitted by each beneficiary within 60 days of the end of the project period. So, for example, if your project finishes, the period ends on 31st of December, these financial statements need to have been submitted before the end of February. As I mentioned, there's a distinction between lump sum grants and actual grants. So let's investigate those distinctions. So yeah, the financial reporting for lump sum involves indicating the work packages that have been completed in an online form on the European Commission's funding and tender portal. In fact, unfortunately, I don't have a screenshot to show you, because although I'm involved currently in several lump sum funded projects, we've yet to go through a period 1 review. So I don't have access to the related screenshots. But my understanding is, with the lump sum funding, when you do the financial statement, it'll ask you for each work package, what percentage of this is complete. So you, as a beneficiary, you need to give your subjective or best objective evaluation of what percentage. And assuming if you're writing down 100%, then it means, and that is then accepted by the Commission, then you are fully entitled to the budget that you were allocated for that work package. What else have I written on the slide? Last bullet point. The European Commission has said that financial audits will not be conducted for lump sum funding because actual costs are not reported in lump sum projects. However, the dedicated lump sum grant agreement still includes the option of financial audits like any other project under Horizon Europe. Lump sum beneficiaries are required to keep a so-called adequate level of records, in brackets presented officially, in contrast to the actual cost model requirements. Moving on to actual cost funding. Financial reporting is done by completing an online form on the European Commission's funding and tender portal. Interim payments reimburse the eligible actual costs claimed during the respective reporting periods. So this screenshot you see in this slide, this was from an actual Horizon 2020 project, and it shows the cost that you would need to indicate for the different categories. So you've got things like, you can just about see on the left, there's things like personnel costs, subcontracting costs, purchase costs, other cost categories. Now, the thing to be aware of with these forms when it's an actual cost reporting, you don't only need to put in, say, the actual figures, the amounts, but certainly for some of the cost categories, you'll also need to give some kind of concise descriptions, and that where I've written in red text and done this red box, these are sort of icons showing, you need to click on each of those and determine whether or not you also need to give some kind of description. So, for example, with personnel costs, at least, you'll need to indicate the total number of person months that have been booked to the different work packages. For things like purchase costs, if they have exceeded 15% of your personnel cost, then you'll have to give some sort of breakdown and some details there. Before I move on to the next slide, this bright, large yellow star thing at the top, I've written here, and this is from the point of view of if you're the coordinator. So I wrote, email the partner's project financial signatories, in brackets, also referred to as PF sign, the acronym, as soon as the project ends, to request them to complete and submit their financial statements at least 2 weeks before the official deadline. So in the previous slide a short time ago, I said, look, you've got this from the end of the official end of the project period 1 or period 2, whatever, there's a 60-day period in which these financial statements have got to be submitted. When you reach the end of the period 1 or period 2, automatically an email gets sent out to these PF these project financial signatories for the different partners. So in theory, at least, they should all be aware, reached the end of a period, I've got 60 days in which to get this financial statement submitted online. I say in theory because, I mean, administrative staff in universities and companies, they're very busy people, they've got many things. It's very easy for this to slip off their awareness. And so what I do is, if I'm the coordinator, I go through very carefully, I find out what these email addresses are for each of the PF sign. And as soon as the project period is officially over, I email them individually. And I say to them, look, please do your financial statement. I don't give them 60 days. I'll give them, say, 45 days. Because I know invariably there's some who won't even meet the 45-day limit, yeah? But if you get to sort of, I give them, say, 45 days, if they haven't done it by 45 days, it kind of gives you an excuse to send them another reminder and chase them up, yeah? Okay, some words, some more specific words about these different cost categories. So look, with personnel costs, of course, you need, for your organization, there'll usually be several of you working on the project, and you need to understand how the costs are done for each person. So from the commission's perspective, they say, well, look, each of you will have a certain day rate and you've worked a certain number of days or fractions of a day on the project. To calculate this day rate, take the actual annual personnel cost for that person. Find out what that amount. In fact, this would be your financial administrative staff should be doing this. But anyway, they should be saying, well, how much does she or he cost the whole year? Okay, I'll then divide that by 215. This magic number 215 is what the Commission consider to be the number of productive days in a year. That gives you a daily rate. However, that's for this reporting, that's not enough, because ultimately you're going to have to say how many person months have been booked by your staff to the different work packages. So you've got to get to this, you've got to get to this figure of person months. And how do you do that conversion? Well, it's as follows. Take the number of hours that member of staff, that researcher has worked on the project, and then divide it by these two figures, 1,720 divided by 12, or in brackets I've written here, hours divided by 143.33 recurring. So this magic number, 143.33, this is the Commission's sort of reference figure of what is the number of productive hours in a month. If you use that conversion factor, that will then give you the person months and allow you to do the necessary reporting in the online tool. If you have any subcontracting costs, which most of the time these projects you don't, but if you do, make sure in that description, in this, I go back the slide, on the right hand side, where I've got the red box, where it says subcontracting costs, click on the R icon, and then in there, make sure you indicate the name of the contractor for the subcontracting costs, indicate the service that they provided, the amount of the invoice, the date of the invoice, and refer to the section in the part B of your grant agreement where the project said it would have subcontracting costs. Really, really important thing, that where it says about the date of the invoice, make sure that date falls within the reporting period. Yeah, don't suddenly indicate a date after the reporting period, because the Commission will just go, look, sorry, doesn't fall in the reporting period, it's not eligible, or it might only be eligible for period 2 or whatever. Purchase costs. Quite a few sub-bullet points here. Now, look, the first thing to understand is you only need to provide a description of purchase costs if your total purchase costs exceed 15% of the total personnel costs. If it's below that, you don't need to give the description. You just say, look, my purchase costs were X. However, if you do exceed this 15% limit, it's only the amount above this 15% limit that you need to give some sort of description. So that might sound a bit abstract. So let me give a concrete example. Let's imagine you had total purchase costs for 16,000 euros, and you had total personnel costs of 100,000 euros. So in other words, 15% of 100,000 would have been 15,000. You've actually got 16,000. So you've gone over by 1,000 euros. This is not a bad thing. This is perfectly normal. All you have to remember is you then have to give a description for at least 1,000 euros of your purchase costs. Okay, it's not a bad mark. Nothing wrong here. Just to have this understanding. So if you do have purchase costs above this 15%, maybe that 1,000 euros or whatever it is above that threshold, maybe they were travel and subsistence costs. If that was the case, make sure you indicate in the description the name of the experts, the destination of where they went to, the dates of the trip. In brackets, those dates need to fall during the project, the reporting period, yeah? The purpose of the trip, And make sure you reference, say, a work package task to which this trip relates to. On the other hand, if this amount over the 15% is related to equipment costs, in that case, make sure you indicate the name of the supplier, the name of the equipment, the amount of the invoice, the date of the invoice. I'm repeating myself here, but obviously the date needs to be within the reporting period. Indicate the amount of the depreciation over the reporting period, because that's what you can actually claim. It's not the cost, but the depreciation. And again, make sure you reference a section in the Part B of the grant agreement where it is indicated that the project would have equipment costs. If, on the other hand, this amount exceeding 15% was due to other goods, for example, research consumables, chemicals, or materials, in that case, in your description, indicate the name of the supplier, the name of the goods, the amount of the invoice, the date of the invoice, and reference the section of the Part B. And the last one, if on the other hand, the amount exceeding 15% is works and services, catering, indicate the name of the supplier, the name of the service, the amount of the invoice, and the date of the invoice, and reference the section in the Part B. And this last bullet point here says other cost categories. Occasionally, I'm trying to recall, I think in the last 20 years, maybe I've only had it once, but occasionally with very large organizations, they do internal invoicing for goods and services. If that is the case, indicate the name of the supplier, the service provided, the amount of the invoice, the date of the invoice, and reference the section in the Part B. Last word on financial reporting. So here the thing to understand is if you are involved in a Horizon Europe project, and by the end of the project, you have claimed grant funds exceeding 430,000, then you will need to have what's called a certificate on the financial statements. This is a requirement. Now, this certificate on the financial statement, it has to be issued by a qualified auditor using the European Commission's template. The template consists of the terms of reference, in brackets, model for the agreement between the beneficiary, affiliated entity, and the auditing firm, and the model for the certificate itself. And I've written here in bold, see QR code to download the template. So just to the right, you see the QR code. If you're in this situation where you have to have a certificate, and in that case, you have to get an auditor, they must use this template. They must use this terms of reference and this model. And this QR code, if you go there, it will enable you to download it. The Commission will not accept, even if you get your costs, say, audited by a company, if the audit firm uses some other terms of reference and some other sort of model certificate, the Commission will reject it. You have to use their one, What else to say? The auditor, they will need to obviously independently check if there's been any irregularities and errors in the report. The EU Commission / funding agency is responsible for deciding the consequences of the errors indicated by the auditor. The certificate of financial statement must be uploaded to the European Commission's funding and tender portal. So, for the risk of boring you, let me quickly go back to this slide here. It's not shown, unfortunately, on this slide, but if this had been at the very end of this particular project, and this particular partner had overall costs exceeding 430,000, then you would have seen somewhere in this financial statement, there'll be a little box where they can upload a PDF version of the certificate on the financial statement. And it's vital that gets uploaded. Last thing to say before I move away from the slide, I'm looking at this yellow bright star at the top. So I've written here 2 to 3 months before the official end of the project, remind the partners with budgets in excess of 430,000 euros to contract an accounting firm to audit their financial statements as soon as the project ends. So I'm writing this point from the perspective of being the coordinator. In my Fit for NMP project, we didn't have any partners with budgets exceeding 430,000. But in the CIFIS Home projects with the Italian partners, I wasn't the coordinator, but I was doing the administrative management. And so I kept a very, very close, careful track on partners who it was expected that they would exceed this sort of limit. And months before the project ended, I was already emailing them and saying, look, if you haven't done it already, sort out, get in contact with an accounting firm, get them lined up so that as soon as this project is finished, they're ready to start auditing your costs. What you don't want to have is a situation where you get to the end of the project and then partners suddenly wake up and go, oh, I need a certificate of my financial statement. Because if that's the case, you almost certainly will not respect this. They won't respect the 60-day limit. They'll find it pretty much, in practical terms, virtually impossible to get within 60 days to go from having no accounting firm to contracting one, them understanding the terms of reference, doing all the audit, providing the certificate. Within 60 days, very little chance. With this periodic reporting, not only do you have the reporting, the part A, the part B, and the financial, you'll typically have some kind of review with the project officer, who'll be supported with, say, 1 to 3 independent experts. And this review will typically come about 2 months after the end of the project period. These project review meetings are now done online. Ever since COVID, that's been the case. Prior to COVID, these reviews were typically held in Brussels, physically. If you're the coordinator, you'll find that the European Commission project officer will usually ask you to propose an agenda for either a half day, in the case of a coordination support action, or quite possibly a full day in the case of research and innovation action or innovation action. And to the right here, on the right of this slide, you see an example. This was from my Fit for NMP. This was our midterm review. So pretty simple agenda, involving introductions of the partners, outline of the project, and then basically each of the work package leaders doing a short, concise presentation about the objectives, progress, achievements during period 1. And then at the end of the meeting, the project officer and the reviewers, they'll typically ask for, well, after each work package, they'll probably ask some questions. And then at the end of the meeting, they might ask for, say, 20 minutes, half an hour, something of this order, in which they discuss amongst themselves and come back and give a first feedback. The actual, if you like, finalized formal feedback from these reviews will be in a report, which maybe only comes 1 or even 2 months after the review meeting. Looking back again to some of the bullet points on the left, I'm looking at the one third from the bottom here. I said, ensure work package leaders use standardized slide presentation template. So if I was the coordinator, I would come up with some template slides for this, and I would issue them, at least 1 month or more before the review. And I would ask the work package leaders, look, please follow this template. What you don't want is to go to this review and have a real mishmash of different slides. It doesn't give a good impression. It doesn't sound like you're a sort of strong collaborative group. Another word of advice, so ask your work package leaders to sort of fill out their standardized templates. remind them that what they put in these slides, it should be consistent with what they wrote for their work package description in the technical report, part B. You don't want some glaring differences. Of course, in the technical report, they will have written very concisely. With the slides, maybe it's a chance to sort of, if it's a scientific project, to show some results, elaborate a little bit more, but still the message should be consistent with what was in the Part B technical report. And the last piece of advice, make sure the consortium holds a practice stress rehearsal of the review meeting, say a few days before the actual review. And then the other partners can pretend to be the reviewers and ask the work package leaders some challenging questions. This is a good thing to do, so you're in the best shape for the review itself. Okay, moving now away from periodic reporting, budget flexibility. So consortium partners often ask me if they can transfer budget between cost categories, for example, transfer budget from travel costs to personnel costs or vice versa. The answer is, well, it depends. If we're talking about a Horizon Europe project with actual costs, can you make this transfer? Well, the answer is yes. And you don't need a grant amendment, provided Article 5.5 of the grant agreement is respected. And now this famous Article 5.5, I've done a screenshot from the grant agreement. You can see it here. To use the Commission's own words, the budget breakdown may be adjusted without an amendment by transfers, brackets, between participants and budget categories, as long as this does not imply any substantive or important change to the description of the action in Annex 1. I won't read the rest of the points there. Notes, I wrote here, note that Article 5.4 refers to estimated budget. So looking again to the right-hand side, above 5.5, you've got 5.4. The Commission used the word estimated budget. So look, although in these grant agreements it shows this budget for that partner and such a budget for another, it's understood that these are estimates. And so potential movement between cost categories or between partners, it is tolerated provided this 5.5 is respected. That's the case for actual costs. If you've got I'm looking at the last bullet point here, if you've got a Horizon Europe lump sum funded project, you can't just make this sort of transfer. It would require a grant amendment. However, hold on a moment. If the supposed transfer that you're thinking about is just from travel, say, to personnel for the same partner, you don't. What does it matter? Because this is lump sum. Yeah, you've got this lump sum amount. It's an estimate. It's anticipated that is enough for you, partner, to do whatever tasks in a work package. And therefore, if you have saved some money on the personnel side, but maybe needs more from the travel for that work package, so what? No problem. The only case I think where maybe it becomes more involved is if you have a lump sum project. So really a lump sum funded project, and for whatever reason, you really need to transfer budget from one partner to another. And in that case, the only way you can do it is through a grant amendment. Which brings me on to the next slide. So, yeah, grant amendments. If you're the coordinator, and I say, I mean, the likelihood of requiring a grant amendment, I'd say in my experience, at least 1 in 2 projects, probably even more, probably most projects I've worked on, there's been some sort of amendment, official amendment made. And These are sort of the typical examples. So the classic one is there's a change in the consortium composition. There's withdrawal or adding a beneficiary, affiliated entity or associated partner. Another classic reason is for an extension of the project duration, requesting additional time due to unforeseen delays or force majeure. Modification of work plan, updating deliverables, milestones, or tasks due to scientific or technical reasons. Budget and costs reallocation, adjusting budget distribution between beneficiaries or cost categories. Change of legal or financial status, updating details if a beneficiary undergoes a legal name change, merges, or faces financial issues. I'm going to look now at the first two examples and talk in concrete terms how you do those amendments. So let's imagine there's a withdrawal of a consortium partner. In that case, you need to initiate the request in the funding and tenders portal through Sigma. The coordinator or the withdrawing partner submits a termination request through the grant management system on the funding and tenders portal. They need to provide justification and supporting documents. So typically it's like a letter which you've been signed and scanned. The request must include a clear reason for termination, potential impacts on the project and relevant supporting documents, e.g. consortium agreement justification letter. You need to update the grant agreement and work plan. The consortium must propose necessary amendments to redistribute the departing partner's remaining tasks and budget, ensuring project continuity. You need to get approval by the European Commission. The EC reviews the requests, assesses risks and project viability before approving or rejecting the termination. Formalization of the termination is the final step. If approved, the grant agreement is amended and the termination is officially recorded, including final cost claims and reporting for the withdrawing partner. The other very, very common example, and I've often had this with twinning projects, is about requests for extending the project duration. Now, probably the thing to mention before I go through all these points, before sort of doing this formal process, it's, as the coordinator, it's probably best, it is best to write an email or through the communications center in Sigma on the European Commission's portal. It's best to write a sort of informal requests, write an email, a message to the project officer saying, look, we need to extend the project for reasons X, Y, Z. And in this email say, so look, I'd like to start this formal procedure in the next few days, next few weeks. For reasons of etiquette, it's good if you kind of give that advance warning. Yeah. Also gives a chance maybe for the project officer to come back. They may request specific information that they'll want to see within your justification. Yeah. Anyway, let's assume you're now doing the formal procedure. So rather like with the other case with the withdrawing partner, you need to initiate the amendment request in the funding and tenders portal. So the project coordinator submits a formal amendment request through the grant management system. You need to provide this justification, so a detailed explanation. There'll be a form box we have to fill in. We outline the reasons for the extension, e.g. delays in the project, unforeseen circumstances, technical challenges. And I've written here in bold, if your chances of getting your amendment request accepted will be greatly increased if you say, look, in your justification, if we don't make this extension, we risk not passing milestone X, Y, Z. And then giving some concrete reasons for that. Always make sure to sort of relate the risk to milestones, and then you're more likely to have a chance to get the request accepted. Anyway, you provided justification, update the grant agreement work plan. So in your part B, your description of action, you're going to have to update at least the Gantt chart. You're going to have to go through very, very carefully, looking at all the deliverables, milestones. In the part A, your 9 forms, update them accordingly. Anywhere in your part B of your grant agreement where you talk about, oh, this is a 3-year project, suddenly you're going to have to edit it and write it so it says it's a 3.5-year project, assuming you're extending by 6 months. And by the way, in 20 odd years of dealing with EU projects, the only time I've heard of projects being allowed to extend by a year was due to the COVID crisis. Otherwise, at least in my humble experience, the most you will be allowed to extend by is 6 months. Whatever in the consortium agreement partner approval, they need to agree to, obviously, to any amendments, such extensions. They need to be aware of it. The European Commission needs to review and approve this amendment request. Assuming that goes ahead, formalization of the amendment. If approved, the updated grant agreement is signed electronically and the new project timeline is officially recorded. So we've dealt with execution and control phase. Your project's finishing, has ended. We're now in the closing phase. So what does that mean? What are the main activities? Well, there's final reporting and deliverables. They need to be submitted on Sigma. All deliverables and milestones need to be completed and documented in the portal. Financial closure, submit final cost claims and justifications of expenditures. So all those financial statements need to be submitted by partners. Review and assessment. Assuming there's a final project review requested by the Commission, that needs to have been executed. Any feedback or additional requests that they give, you need to have responded to. Dissemination exploitation, finalize and publish project results, data sets and scientific publications, ensure long-term sustainability and exploitation of project outcomes. With regard to intellectual property and data management, finalize any agreements on IPR rights and data sharing, ensure compliance with open science and fair data principles, archiving and record, keeping, maintain project records for at least 5 years or as required by the European Commission, ensure availability of documents for potential audits or reviews. And then really now we're talking about the project closure and next steps. So officially close the project in the funding and tenders portal, plan follow-up initiatives, maybe new project proposals, collaborations, funding applications. And if you can, it's good to write up some sort of learning log, especially if you're the coordinator, on the things that went well, what didn't, and any other advice you would give yourself or others for future projects. So, dear colleagues, that just leads me to show my last slide. This is the last homework towards receiving a certificate of project management. Again, this is entirely optional. You're not obliged to do this. For this last homework, it's a bit different. What I really realized looking back over these trainings is I've never really said very much about the use of generative AI. I think I can honestly say it's because it's something that's very much going on right now. The impact on proposal writing, the impact on project management, and to be honest, to certainly quite a bit an extent, I'm learning myself. Anyway, generative AI is transformative in so many respects, not least of which proposal writing, project administration. So I think for your last assignment, those of you who want to do it, it would be good to go away and write a short report, 400 to 600 words, covering the following two areas. So firstly, think about how generative AI can be used for proposal writing. Explain how AI tools, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Copilot, so forth, how they can perhaps assist in proposal writing. But at the same time, also think about, I mean, not only about the benefits, but also think maybe about challenges and are there ethical considerations? I think you're not supposed to use generative AI sort of blindly in proposal writing. If you're using it, the commission is sort of expecting that you give reference to that. But equally, well, I say equally, generative AI, I think, can also help with project administration. So describe how AI tools can support project administrative tasks. You might recall earlier in this slide presentation, I said there's certain deliverables which are just standard across all projects, data management plan, dissemination, communication, exploitation plan. Surely there's scope there to use AI, generative AI to help with that. But likewise with proposal writing, not only are there benefits, there could be some challenges and there may be some ethical considerations. So please, those of you who want to, have a go at writing this essay. Assuming you do that, send me an email, and the deadline is the 9th of May for that.